Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Thank you so much for joining us. This is the last show before a bit of a summer break throughout August. We'll be back in early September, so we want to do something a little differently this week. Take a look back at some of the big stories that have happened in the first half of the year, the ones that kind of stand out as emblematic or important in the way we're kind of viewing BC politics. Today, look a bit ahead to the fall, what's coming up that's important that we may be talking about when the show returns, and take a look at some of the standout kind of MLA performers that we've seen so far in the early half of 2025. To do that, we're going to bring in the panel. Jillian Oliver, Jeff Ferrier are here. Ali Blades is off this week, which means we will see her again when you see us again in early September. Thanks to both of you for being here. We're going to go to you first to kind of pick, a story that stands out for you as one of the big themes. We are not going to include, to start off with here, just Donald Trump tariffs, because I think that is kind of this dominant overarching thing that will fit into a lot of the other picks that we come up with here. But there's no Trump tariffs as just a single kind of a selection here. Jillian, let's start with you. What's a big story that sort of stands out for you in the first half of the year that you think is kind of captures BC politics today?
I think it's the government's shift to going sort of all in on the economic development and especially resource development, and that manifesting in the sort of session-long fight we saw over Bills 14 and 15, those project accelerating bills to speed up major projects. It was really interesting to see the government shift focus from the election that we had, like actually kind of recently, even though it feels like a lifetime ago, where they said they were going to go slowly and consult, and that they had learned that lesson from their previous term, to totally switch gears and say, we're going full speed ahead. We can't do things fast enough. And see some of the political fallback from that. Also interesting to see both of the opposition parties decide to oppose it. I think that's more expected from the Greens, although it was interesting because they're in a partnership agreement with the government. And then the Conservatives oppose it as well, even though, this is something that they basically campaigned on and would support if they were in government. So interesting to see them come out of the election and sort of start to make those real political decisions that'll shape their future ahead of the next election.
It really did upend the kind of political table there. Like, I think 6 months after the election to move so quickly, Jeff. Let's just get your sort of response to that. And also, I think Jillian's right. We talked about it in the past too, that the Conservative reaction too, to oppose something they theoretically support, but not when the NDP do it. Oh, hi, Ophelia. She also supports that as well. Jeff, what do you think of that?
Yeah, no, I think the number one issue in British Columbia in the first 6 months was Donald Trump tariffs. Now let's talk about that at length. No, I think Jillian picks the fundamental economics story of the first half of the year. I think that the second half of the year, and we'll talk about this more later in the show, is going to be about, can the government make this legislation work and get some major projects built? I also think Jillian raises a really interesting point about the Conservatives' reaction to the legislation. In Ottawa, where the Prime Minister brought in a similar set of laws, the Conservatives voted for it. And their position was, it's a good first step, but we're going to be there to hold the government to account on the bill and make sure that they're delivering, which strikes me as the position that John Rustad and the Conservatives might have taken here, that would have been more attuned to their values and their brand than lining up with the Greens, who are, this is right on brand for them, standing up for proper review permits and authorizations. But it's an odd spot that the Conservatives found themselves in, and it shows that they're still a work in progress. And we'll see what they can drum up in the second half of the year to try and get back on track.
It is, to me, it's such a fascinating, when you sort of pull back and look at, BC politics and the trends, it's so fascinating to watch a government that almost lost the election, that reversed on several positions right before the election because it had the wrong read on the electorate on decriminalization and on voluntary care and on the carbon tax, and then came out of the election saying, man, we got to slow down and listen to people, turn around and with Bill 7 say, which was the first of the bills, we're going to do what needs to be done. We need more power to do it. And if you don't like it, we'll go to an election on it. And you're like, wow, that is quite a change in tone from a government. And so to me, I totally agree with this election and I think the larger sort of political shift within the NDP from humility after almost losing to a group of what they called racist wackos to telling everyone that they know exactly what needs to be done and just wait and you'll see that we're right later, including to First Nations chiefs and others. We got to do what we need to do. We'll check in with you later, and I'm sure you'll be happy with what we're doing. To me, that's just such a fascinating, larger kind of shift in the New Democrat ideology in this year. And Bills 7 and 14 and 15 really pick on that.
But I think,
Jeff.
I think that's an interesting point. I think that the NDP before the election were poor on picking up at trends, but I think here they got the shift in where the people are at on this issue of Donald Trump and the tariffs that we're not talking about. But They pivoted really fast and right in line with where the public was at. And so it seems like they've learned a lesson. They thought the lesson was we need to slow down and consult more, which I think it was before November. But afterwards, they did better to shift. They did better to listen to the public. And though it's diametrically opposed to what they campaign on in October, it's what voters and citizens at that stage wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see if this is, a moment in time because Trump is such a massive factor that, we saw also the same thing with the federal election, that the Liberals had this sort of like crazy comeback that nobody saw coming, and things are changing so fast and politicians really need to be responsive in the moment. If that's just because of what's happening right now with the Americans, or if that's a new trend that's here to stay. And, we're going to kind of continuously see election promises not matter so much because politicians really need to kind of respond to the quickly changing information environment and the fast vibe shifts that we keep talking about. And we kind of see those sort of broken promises as sort of a thing of the past. And it's all just about meeting the moment from here on out.
Yeah. Recognizing and meeting the massive kind of shift in electorate mood is, you're right. That's the real question. Does the public settle down if and when this tariff situation gets resolved? And what does that do? How do politicians view that? Jeff, do you have a story that you want to highlight from the first half of the year?
I do. Since you banned me from talking about Donald Trump and the tariffs.
Yeah, it's going so well.
Yeah. Well, I thought an interesting story was what's going on with the Conservatives, BC Conservatives, in the first 6 months of this year. Here you have a party that in the last election came really close to winning, probably the best showing of that party ever, that party, and it's making real gains on what the former BC Liberals did in the previous election. And they've had a big split in the party. They've had people leave the party, form their own party. And it was interesting to see the split, not over policy or healthcare. It was about whether it was okay to acknowledge deaths of First Nations Indigenous kids in residential school. And this was done by, you might say it's done by MLAs who've moved to another party, but these were folks who were greenlit, rubber stamped by John Rustad in the election. Now, he tried to rein it in after the damage was done, but then he just made things worse by accusing people who were opposed to his leadership of criminal offense, of blackmail, which you don't generally, on an email in writing, which is generally something you don't see leaders who are in control do. And then the NDP said, let's have a police investigation into this, and then Rustad walked it back, again, showing he's a bit out of touch. And even this week, we have First Minister's meeting talking about Donald Trump and the tariffs, signing trade deals with Ontario, Manitoba, and the Yukon. Everyone was watching what was happening with the Red Chris mine and the miners who were trapped there. And thank goodness that they got out safe. And you had John Rustad and his team talking about canceling the Patillo Bridge and Don Cherry and poppies. So poppies in July. It's an interesting call. And they have a bunch of moderates in the party who came in the last election because they sensed an opportunity to grab power. And they've been, with a few exceptions, Peter Millibar and the Indigenous issues, have been really silent. And so if the story for the Conservatives was supposed to be, we are showing British Columbians that we're a sensible alternative to the government, that they can trust us in the next election to replace the NDP, they're not there yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jillian, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it speaks to a lot of things. I think the first is just a really constant truth in politics that it's so much easier to hold together a party when power is within grasp. And I think, you saw the sort of shift with the Conservatives, Rustad having a really strong handle on leadership during the election when they thought they might win, and then they didn't. And now he's struggling to manage a sort of unruly caucus that all has their own agenda and opinions. And I think, just kind of, it's an interesting thing where we kind of see the political realities of governing a party spilling over into the public. And I think also, just the echoes of infighting can resonate for so long. You have not only former Conservative MLAs who've splintered off to their own party, but also staff and people that have these sort of personal grudges, which can be very motivating, but obviously very toxic, and can continue through for years and even decades, like we've seen in politics. And it's always so interesting to see how those sort of personal dynamics play into the broader political picture. And, the parties try to kind of act like it's about issues, but often it's about what's underneath. And I think you're really seeing that with the Conservatives, and it's going to be so fascinating to watch as they wrap up their leadership review in the fall.
And also, in a larger level, how hard it is to kind of hold bigger tent parties together. And I'm not saying the Conservatives are big tent, but they're kind of going through a little bit of what maybe the NDP went through a while ago, whereas the environmental people with strong environmental views prefer to have, rally around the Greens and prefer to kind of maybe not compromise that within the NDP tent and find a different platform to express it. And that's happening in the Conservatives too. The big tent party is harder in this environment, especially with razor thin majorities where you can split off and have, influence that exceeds your few thousand votes that you got and maybe a couple of seats because of how close things are in the legislature. So yeah, an interesting. Though Rustad still survived, as we speak, he is still in control. So we'll see what happens, and maybe a topic as we switch to what's happening this fall and things that we should be looking forward to when we come back that might be defining the political agenda. Jillian, let's stick with you on that. What do you think is going to be a big topic this fall?
I think one of the first big things we're going to get is a fiscal update and the sort of impacts of some of the decisions that the government has been making. So far, we haven't seen that be like a huge political issue. We kind of just continue to charge ahead, but the government's been kind of ragging the puck on it, saying that they're looking under every rock for cuts. Trying to see if they can tighten their belt while also trying to get some of these big projects on track to encourage growth to sort of make up some of the shortfall that they're having. But they're not going to be able to do that forever. So it's going to be interesting to see if the deficit is bigger than it's already been reported and if that matters.
Yeah, it feels like it will be. We've seen some economists talk not just about the fact that the carbon tax being canceled was almost $2 billion in revenue, but the GDP, partly due to Trump again and kind of the economic uncertainty is weaker than forecast. Housing has softened, which impacts property transfer tax and real estate starts and housing starts. And Jeff, it looks like the budget update could be a very bad one in September.
I'll say it's going to be an interesting one for sure. I think Jillian makes good points about the fiscal update. I think related to that, we're going to see in the fall is public sector bargaining. You have the government already now engaging with BCGEU, the government workers, 34,000 of them. They're asking for significantly more than what the province is offering. With over 2 years, it would be $4 billion versus what the government is offering, which is $2 billion. Obviously, that's going to have an impact on the bottom line fiscal update, the budget, and where BC's at in its capacity to deliver on important services like healthcare and education. And that's just one union. They're going to be engaging with the teachers and be engaging with the nurses. They're going to work with other health workers across the public sector. And you have this structural deficit. You have the province trying to dig out from it through economic development. And it's got this big, huge pressure on them now, which is to hold the line on compensation for workers, which, if we're talking off-brand NDP, this is the last round of bargaining was very good for public sector unions. This time it's going to be really tough, and it's going to have an impact on finances of the province. So we'll see how that plays out in the fall.
And I also think another sort of trend line to follow through on that is the government's promise to do some type of cost cutting and efficiencies, which New Democrats have never done in the 8 years that they've been in power, is a very sensitive and difficult issue, fraught with all sorts of kind of political ramifications when you start cutting and removing, and in some cases hiring freeze or laying people off within government. And the deficit, if we do see it in September being in the realm of $13 to $15 billion, no amount of cost cutting is going to get the government anywhere close to that without going through with a hatchet. And so the expectation of using that to help soften or chart a path to balance is minimal, but the pain is going to be real. And I'll be interested to see how far the government actually goes in implementing that when it's not possible to kind of achieve the goals in doing, especially in the healthcare system, at the same time through the health authorities and elsewhere. Plus, it adds a bit of a lens that we constantly come back to on the show too, where decisions the government is making get thrown back in its face over trying to be efficient inside the government. Why are you spending money on X when you're supposed to be finding efficiencies in here? Why are you hiring a person over here to do this special review when you should be doing it? It kind of becomes a persistent sort of narrative too that is fascinating for the government to have to deal with. So keep an eye on that. Jeff, did you have another fall topic?
Well, the other fall topic is the BC Greens leadership race. It looks like it's becoming kind of a two-vision contest within the party. Of the one candidate who's a doctor, who expect he will, Jillian, doctor's name.
Jonathan Kerr.
Jillian working on his campaign. All of us would know that, yes.
But here's a candidate who's taking the view that the Greens should be a provincial party, that they should have a broad range of positions on all of the issues facing the province, and they should be positioning themselves to be a governing alternative to the NDP. And on the other side, I don't want to forget their names, Jillian,
Emily
Lowen.
And Adam Bremner Aikens.
But I've read their positions. I've seen how they're positioning themselves, and it seems like the direction they would take the party into would be more of a protest party. It would be focused on a few issues and trying to raise awareness and seek gains on those. So it's going to be interesting to see what the party is going to try and position itself as. I think we've seen Sonia Furstenau try to make it into the broader alternative, but it's up to voters in the Green Party to determine where they're going to go, and it'll be interesting to see that in the fall.
Mm-hmm. A larger sort of existential crisis for the Greens at this point. We've seen it federally. We're seeing it sort of provincially when you, after several elections, kind of appear sort of stuck at this point of 2 to 3 MLAs. Where do you go? How do you grow that? What does that look like? Jillian, I know, and we've disclaimed this on previous shows, you are working on with Jonathan Kerr's campaign, but what do you think of the the stakes in the leadership race here?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting time for the party to be reflecting. I think the pro of having a leadership contest so early in the electoral cycle is that the leader will come in September and be able to, spend 3 years building the party ahead of the next election. But they're sort of being asked to choose a brand that is going to have that staying power. And we talked earlier in the show just how quickly things can change. And I think, it's a tough debate kind of to be having right now because everything, feels so urgent. Yet we're making this decision for the future. And I think, it is a existential question for the party if they want to continue to grow and be more broadly appealing across the province, or if they want to sort of, double down on being a protest party. It's been fascinating to work on.
And let's see if the Greens can be the first party that I have ever covered in 17 years of politics to have a leadership race without any type of controversy or scandal or debate over the voting method or pins or eligibility. We'll see if they manage to pull that off by September the 24th. We're running out of time here. I encourage people to subscribe to the audio podcast because we're going to do a segment on sort of top performing MLAs. Let's just tease people. We only have 30 seconds here on who some of the names are that we're going to be talking about in that. Jeff and Jillian. Jeff, don't say why, just say who.
I'm going to be focusing on the Minister of Energy and Climate Solutions, Adrian Dix.
Okay. Jillian?
I was going to talk about Green interim leader Jeremy Valeriot and Peter Miller-Barr from the Conservatives.
I'm going to bring up a whole bunch of people, but Conservative rural health critic Brennan Day, Ravi Kalon, who's just moving around in the government portfolio, and public safety critic Eleanor Sturko, just talking a bit about how they're doing in their roles. Make sure you subscribe to the audio podcast for that. Thank you so much for watching the show. We're going to be back a little bit of a summer break to chat with you more about BC politics in September. So we will be back on your screens then. Until then, thanks so much for watching. We will see you then. Take care. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.